Hello everybody, my name is Lat Mackey, and this is Sequence Break, Episode 10, Super Mario RPG Randomizer with Pidge01. Very excited, as always, for the guest today. It's the one, the only, Pidge01. And I guess, first of all, hello Pidge, how you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks. How are you?
Good. If you don't mind, is there an origin story behind your name by any chance?
I was 11 years old in either 2000 or 2001. It was the end of 6th grade anyway. I was looking for Pokemon chat rooms, and I put in the name Pidge because Pidgeot's my favorite Pokemon, and it was already taken. So I was like, oh, well, I guess I gotta put a number at the end of my name. So I just put, like, I don't remember what the 01 came from, but I think I just wanted to spell out the number 1 to be, like, creative. Yeah. And funny enough, the person that already owned the name Pidge is still my friend to this day. She was my first internet friend, and I still have her on Facebook and everything like that. So
Wow.
That was like 19 years ago now.
Wow, that is actually like a perfect segue. So when did you in that case, when did you start playing games? Like, what was kind of your first introduction to video games and that whole video game thing?
Oh, it was actually much before that. My mom was, she was an arcade gamer in the 80s, and my dad had, like, all the second-gen consoles when they were dating and when they first got married. So, like, when I came along, my dad had a Game Boy, so that was what I was always playing when I was, like, a toddler and in preschool.
So cool. I don't know if your parents were anything like mine, but late at night, apparently, we would, my brothers and I would wake up and we would find our parents playing Game Boy Tetris. And I don't know if there was any experience like that in the house, but the parents played the Game Boys just as much as we did.
My dad definitely did. My mom, she wasn't playing as much by the time I was born, and my dad, they started a business around the time I was 3 years old, so, like, gaming wasn't really a thing for them anymore. Except occasionally my dad would play GoldenEye with me and my brother. But the only thing I woke up in the middle of the night for was to sneak out of my room at 4 a.m. and start recording Super Mario Bros. Super Show. Started watching it, and I got in trouble one morning for that. My mom was like, "We have a VCR, just record it. I'll show you how to set up the timer."
You don't need to be up for that. Oh my gosh, that's so awesome. So it sounds like a Nintendo house. Were there any games that like first hooked you or first got you addicted to video gaming or anything like that?
Absolutely. That game was Dr. Mario for the Game Boy, which is funny because that is, like, widely memed on as, like, the silliest early version of the game.
No joke. This was not on purpose, by the way. I just changed the interview layout, and we're using a Dr. Mario as the interview layout. So that is so crazy.
Oh, that's amazing, because I do also speedrun that game. The Game Boy version of the game is kind of different from the other ones of its time, like Super Nintendo and NES, in that you have to stack 4 colors of the same color to eliminate a line. But the Game Boy version doesn't actually leave you 3 spaces at the top of the bottle. Sometimes it can populate viruses into the second and third row, which occasionally makes, like, boards that are extremely difficult to solve, and good luck with that. So getting a deathless run in 0 to 20 Game Boy is actually a really impressive feat and stuff that not everyone has accomplished.
Did the Game Boy Dr. Mario have a versus mode? I can't quite remember.
It did. You needed a link cable for it.
Oh, okay, so you needed separate Game Boys and the cartridge and everything for that.
Yeah.
It was definitely, I mean, I think the game still holds up really well today. It's super fun, and it's for me, it was like, it reminded me of Tetris, but was definitely a good alternative to Tetris too, to mix it up as far as puzzling.
Yeah, I still love it. Like, the Game Boy version especially has some pretty interesting movement tech that I think is kind of cool. Like, it's obsolete in the other versions of the game, because in the Super Nintendo version, you can just press left or right to move left or right quickly. But in the Game Boy version, you gotta flip while you're doing it. It's like, okay, this is hurting my hands, but I'll do it.
Oh, joy, the limitations of the original Game Boy.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, that's awesome. I've many of friends who actually still geek out on Game Boy, who aren't like speedrunners, or they're outside of our community. And it's really cool that people like that. That's one of those games that has definitely survived and shown the test of time, which is really cool.
Definitely.
Okay, so very cool. So that's definitely. I'm curious, when did you first discover then speedrunning? Like, what was like your first experience of maybe watching a speedrun or trying one out on your own? I'm not sure. What's your speedrunning story, if you don't mind?
To be honest with you, I get asked this question often, and I honestly don't remember. That's probably an underwhelming answer. I really have no idea what my first exposure to speedrunning was. I do have a couple of like pivotal moments in my past that kind of like got me more into it. I don't remember when I first discovered speedrunning because like I have been in the competitive Smash community since 2011, and I had a couple friends in that community who were speedrunners, and I didn't really know much about it. Like I didn't kind of understand what it was all about. But occasionally, I'd watch GDQ. I'd have it on in the background while I did something else. Like I never knew when it was happening. I just open up Twitch and say, "Oh, they're doing speed runs on the front page. That's kind of cool. I'll just leave that on in the background while I'm working on whatever. I was working on like a Mario Bros. 3 card simulator or something like that." Sorry, what were you saying?
No. Please continue.
Oh, yeah. There were a couple different things that were kind of important in getting into speedrunning. One of them was when Morks, a DKC 2 and 3 speedrunner, was staying at my house. Back in the day, in like 2012, in the Smash Bros. Brawl community in Toronto, I was one of the only people in our community who didn't live with their family, so I didn't have to ask anyone's permission for them to stay over at my house. So whenever people would come in from out of town, usually they would stay at my house because I lived fairly close to where the venue was, and I also never had any issues like having people allowed to stay over. So one time, the Quebec players were staying with me, and Morks was one of them, and he ran DKC3 at a GDQ. I think it was 2015, and also an earlier one. He saw that I had a Super Nintendo, so he was just like doing random speed stuff in DKC2, and I'm like, oh, that's really cool. I wonder if I could do that. But I never like really thought much of it. 2015 rolls around, and I find out there's actually going to be a speedrun marathon in Toronto, and I'm like, holy crap, that's amazing. The speedrun marathon was integrated with an esports event called EGL, which if you've ever heard of EGLX, it's like our big esports expo up in Canada that happens once or twice a year. EGL was like the pilot event for EGLX. It happened early in 2015. The organizers were they're having Smash Bros. Tournaments, FGC tournaments, LAN game tournaments, and they also had a speedrunning section. So they invited a couple people there. So I met Trihex, I met Majin Phil, I met some other people. I met Astor, he goes by now. He used to be Elminster 45 back then, ran Super Metroid. He and I are still pretty good friends to this day. But I was like, sort of in the area, just kind of waiting for it to start. And Trihex's Super Nintendo wasn't working. So we found there was a vendor in the venue that was selling like a third-party Super Nintendo, like just a console that could play Super Nintendo and NES games. So we got him one. He was able to borrow it from the vendor and was able to do his Yoshi's Island run. And because I was just kind of hanging around in the area, he let me be on the couch. So that was like a really cool moment for me. I'm like, oh wow, this actually kind of seems like something I could really get into. Yeah. And later that year, one of my friends from the SMRPG community, oh, actually, there's another part to the story. A couple months before that, I was streaming Super Mario RPG just casually because it's my favorite game of all time. I was just streaming it once a week. I was doing a playthrough of the game, except I play through it so many times I'm running out of things to do in the game. So I'm like, hey, you know what I'm going to do this time? I used to do no equips, no level grinding, and it is actually really difficult because at the time I didn't know all the perfect blocks in the game. So I had done it twice before, but I did it at my ex-boyfriend's house. So a bunch of people on Twitter were telling me it was impossible. And I'm like, what? No, it's not. I've done it. Oh, okay, you know what? I'll stream it and prove you all wrong. So I would stream part of the playthrough once a week. And one day, a guy that I knew because I used to watch I Ate Your Pie speedrun the game, and he was friends with Milnium. They would race once in a while. So Milnium shows up in my chat one day, who just found me through the directory. And he's just like, what the heck are you doing? And I'm just explaining, oh yeah, I'm just doing this no equips, no level grinding playthrough. It's just something that I like to do. And he's like, oh, this is interesting. He just kind of thought that was weird and popped into my stream. And then we became friends because I'm like, oh, hey, I recognize you. And during the year, he would say stuff to me like, hey, you should try out the speedrun. Like, you obviously know what you're doing with the game. And I said to him, nah, I'd never be any good at that. Are you kidding me? So then at the end of the year, I finally caved. I was like, okay, you know what? 2016, my New Year's resolution, I will learn the SMRPG speedrun and I will complete a run. So And here we are today.
The rest is history. Oh my god!
Yeah.
It's so funny, like how so many of us in the community meet each other. I love these. Like, it's just it never ceases to amaze me how sometimes so simple or something innocuous just turns into something you're gonna know this person for the next 10 years. You know, just
Yeah, no kidding. Like it was so random. And my first couple days streaming the game, like just starting to learn it, is actually how I met my best friend. He came into my stream and started helping me, and now I can't imagine what my life would be without him. It's just like they just happen like that.
And I think you hit on something that's kind of interesting too. There's always going to be crossover with other communities and things like that. And you mentioned the Smash community, and I've noticed. I mean, even today, I mean, AGDQ is coming up, and there's already a tournament being organized for Smash. There is a heavy cross. In my opinion, I've noticed that there's been a bunch of people who have crossed over from Smash to speedrunning and back and forth again. And I'm curious, is there anything about that game that makes it that appeals to both speedrunners and somebody who wants to be playing Smash? I don't know the game very well, so.
I'm just gonna brag for a sec. I actually did win the N64 Smash tournament at SGDQ 2018.
Hell yes, nice, congrats.
Oh, that was fun. That was actually the game that I played competitively for the longest. I honestly just think it's just the ubiquity of Smash and also the ubiquity of Nintendo speedruns. Like there are a lot of people that speedrun Nintendo games, and most of them grew up in Nintendo households. And if you grew up in a Nintendo household, you probably had at least one copy of Super Smash Bros. And Super Smash Bros. Growing up, that was like the party game that you played with your friends. So that's just kind of how it is. That's also how people kind of get into the competitive Smash community. When you get that many people under one roof who like video games, like there's bound to be enough people that are really into Smash Bros. Who will play it.
You know what? That actually makes a lot of sense. What you're saying. I always forget too the power of the Nintendo inside of a household, and you know what kind of games go along with it. Especially games that are everywhere, that are so popular and things like that. That makes a lot of sense on the Smash side of things.
Yeah. Like my brother and I were only a year apart. I'm older by 1 year, so we grew up with. We got the first Super Smash Bros. When it came out. I was 10, he was 9, and that kind of like. That shaped a lot of things for us going forward. Like that was something we played Smash like constantly, except we didn't play versus each other. We played on teams versus CPUs. Wow. And so that I had so many good memories playing that game that when I went to university, I had 2 people on my floor who in my dorm who were really into playing Smash Bros. Like competitively. So I would play with them and I'd always get my ass kicked. But then I started going to tournaments. When I moved out of the dorm, I started going to tournaments, and then I went to hang out with them at their house a few months later, and then no one could beat me anymore. And they were like, "Oh my god, you got so good! Like, what happened?"
No, you touched upon something too. I think that's is becoming now a common theme with everyone who I've chatted with, is that it's not so like with video games. There's definitely the nostalgia factor, but there's also these really good memories associated with certain things. And you just touched on one with your brother playing Smash and things like that. I mean, I have the same exact experience. I have these really just quality, great memories of playing with my brothers playing video games. We were a Mario Kart folks, but you know, it's pick your poison. It's one of those things where it's like it goes above and beyond a little bit of nostalgia, where you really have some really enjoyable memories of these things.
Yeah, I think that also, for some people, not for everyone, I think for me in particular, that also factors into what games I choose to speedrun. If I have a really positive memory associated with that game, or if I remember really enjoying it when I was younger, I think about playing it again to just kind of like relive that a little bit, except, I'm going to learn the speedrun and do things a little differently. Most of the games that I run are stemmed in that.
Interesting. So, and I think that's, people ask, hey, what's a good first speed run and things like that. And my always recommendation, because this is what the recommendation to me is, pick a game that you love and that you're really going to enjoy, because you're going to be playing it a million different times. So pick something that you enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also I also hear the counter argument that if you learn the speedrun, you'll never be able to enjoy it the same way again, but it actually only made me appreciate SMRPG more. So I guess my advice to that also would be watch a video of the speedrun and see if you actually like what they're doing. If you don't don't speedrun it. Pick another game. But if you think it's kind of cool, go for it. You're only going to increase your appreciation for the game.
So you mentioned it, and you took us a little bit through your actually why you ended up choosing Super Mario RPG anyway to be your first speed run. Was there any I don't know, hesitation or anything that the reason I ask is because an RPG to speed run, especially as your first one, for me personally seems intimidating. I play a lot of platformers that are under 30 minutes. This is a game that's going to take, but you have to put hours in just to complete a run. And was there any, when you first started learning it, was there any sort of something, any intimidation or any challenges along the way learning the run?
I think my biggest source of intimidation was, like most people, 100 super jumps, but I was also very easily convinced that it's not that difficult to do. I couldn't do it at the time, but I had done 30 before at an ex-boyfriend's house, and I was like, oh, I mean, I did 30 once. I'm sure I could do it again if I just practiced enough. But I was also kind of afraid of doing a run and getting to the 100 super jumps and just losing the run because I can't complete it. Just like would not be able to understand why I can't get it. And that actually never happened. To this day, I've never lost a run to just like not being able to nail the super jumps, just like sitting there wondering why I can't get it. That has never happened. It's that the tech is like, it looks a lot harder than it actually is. You just have to put a lot of time into learning it. But that was kind of like my biggest source of hesitation. I was like, I can't super jump. So like, what am I going to do in the speed run? Like, I'm not going to have the super suit. There actually is a route that does not use super jumps that people can learn if they want to just pick up the game sort of casually and not really invest that much time into learning that tech. But I think it took maybe like 2 seconds of someone telling me, "Oh no, it's not that hard," and I'd be like, "Okay, you know what? I believe you. I'll learn it." I was very easily swayed.
No. I mean, okay. So my experience with SMRPG is mostly just as a viewer and as a fan. I find the speedrun of it to be utterly watchable all the time. No matter when it's on and who's running it, I really enjoy watching the speedrun. And I didn't realize that there actually even is a route that could get you around it, just so if you want to start. But I'm still on the edge of my seat every time I'm counting with the chat along, counting 100 of those things during the run.
Yeah, that's
Go ahead, I'm
That's
sorry.
one of the kind of I was just gonna say that's one of the kind of cool things about the speed run of SMRPG is that it incorporates so many different skills, and there isn't really a lot of downtime in the run because the cutscenes are relatively short when you think about it from an RPG perspective. The longest cutscene is like maybe a couple minutes, and the other nice thing about SMRPG is that we are allowed to use turbo controllers, so we don't destroy our hands like mashing or anything. Not that you would in that game anyway, but it's just a nice kind of quality of life thing. Everything happens like super fast. Like the overworld movement is fast. There's lots of platforming. There's lots of very short menuing. So the one time you do have to do a long menu, it looks really impressive. You have to have like very good action command skills because of the whole time hit system. Like being able to do the speedrun properly is contingent entirely on that. It's there's a lot of variety in the things you have to do in that game, and it all happens so quickly, even over the course of 3 or 5 hours, depending on your category, that it's just like a really fun speedrun to watch in general. I think I used to love watching it before I learned it.
Murdoch in the chat is asking, isn't it 101 total jumps? Is it actually 101? Did I?
No, it's not really because we don't consider the first jump as part of the count because it has a different damage calculation, and also it's impossible to miss.
Okay, there you go.
You press the Y button, you're going to get the jump. We don't consider that because of not only the different damage calculation, but also because your super jumps counter starts at 0, like in programming terms. If you're familiar with arrays, it starts at 0. So if you just press Y and do a single super jump and drop, if you go talk to the dog in Monster Town, he says your record stands at 0, so we don't count that one.
Fair enough. That actually makes a lot of sense. You touched on I think one of the reasons that I enjoy watching the SMRPG runs too is that there's always it seems like there's so much variety of tech, to your point, and then there's also something different always happening. The only other RPGs I can think of are Paper Mario. I mean, the same type of games where it's like it's not just I don't want to generalize RPG speedruns and just say there's menuing and then there's the all that kind of stuff. But it always does seem there's platforming. There's just a bunch of interesting stuff happening in SMRPG all the time. It seems like.
Yeah, and like you touched on, Paper Mario is very much the same. That's also a really fun speedrun to watch for similar reasons. And also, Paper Mario definitely has a lot of variety in its categories, which I think is really cool. I don't know much about the game myself, but I have a couple friends who run it, like Vernie and Yoshizilla especially. Yoshizilla is amazing at that game. Shoutouts to him. He was at RPG Limit Break this year as well. Yeah, I used to speedrun a glitch category of Earthbound, and it's very different from SMRPG, not in like a better or worse way, just a different way. Because there's most RPGs don't have a platforming element, but they're still, I think, just as interesting in their own kind of way. In terms of Earthbound, especially your inventory management, I think is really cool. I think that like every RPG speedrun kind of has something unique about it that sets it apart from everything else in the genre.
I totally agree, and I as much as I've never actually attempted an RPG speedrun, I completely agree with you. I think there's so many different things that make them unique, and they're all that's I think probably why I enjoy watching them, because of the variety. This is a good question in chat actually. Murdoch asks again, why do you rotate ABXY when super jumping?
Because I'm an idiot, pretty much. There's no like actual reason to it. I'll actually tell you the story about that. I thought you could only use the Y button to super jump when I was first starting to learn the run, and then somebody told me you can actually use any button, and I'm like, oh, okay. And that people have their own kind of preferences on which button they like to use. Like some people like to use B. I don't think anybody uses X. If they did, like that would be the ultimate flex. And I just thought like, oh, wouldn't it be kind of funny if somebody like pressed every button on the controller to super jump, and I was also like, that's like a terrible idea, but I think it would be funny, so I'm gonna do it. So I did it once, like just to see if I could, like just to see if I could do it, like just because I thought it would be funny. And then I was like, oh, actually, this isn't that bad. This is obviously like moving my thumb somewhere else, so it's like really stupid because I'm doing two things at once instead of just focusing on pressing the button. But also, I came up with my own counting system for it, so I only count Y presses. So I'm counting to 25, which like placebo in my brain feels like less intimidating than counting to 100. I don't recommend it because like, if you are learning how to super jump, and while you're trying to learn how this tech works, you're also moving your hand all around the controller, like you're going to be in for a bad time. And I only did it because like I've always like kind of been like a class clown kind of archetype. So I don't know. I just thought it'd be funny, so I did it, and now I can't not do it. So I kind of cursed myself.
Hey, but in all fairness, we're attempting games hundreds and thousands of times. Sometimes you got to do something to keep it interesting and keep yourself engaged. Sometimes,
The funny thing is that like one time Albrecht was telling me, he's like, "Oh yeah, I do that too on runs that I'm not taking seriously." And I'm like, "Oh okay, well I only do it on runs. I do it on every run because now I have to do it. If I try now to just press one button, and like it gets me really anxious. So when I'm doing ultra jumps, because you typically don't have to do more than like 14 ultra jumps, and the frame window for that one is super forgiving until it hits 18. With ultra jumps, sometimes I just press one button. I'm like, oh no, I'm gonna drop. One time I was at Smash a Record 2016, and at that marathon, Pie and Mill actually had a co-op run, and that was my first time meeting either of them. It was my first speedrun event that I traveled to. I was hanging out with them because they were using one of my practice carts, and Mill did super jumps, but he did the rotation ABXY backwards, and he turns to me and he goes, I call that the reverse pitch.
Curious, is Smash the Record, the 2016, is that the one that was in Ontario, California by any chance?
No, that was 2017. The one in Ontario, California is when I ran Earthbound and Dr. Mario and did some other fun stuff on stream. But 2016, I was just on couch. 2016 was in, it was near Orlando, Florida.
Oh, wow. It was on the other side of the country. Holy cow. Okay.
Yeah.
The reason I ask is because we were talking earlier a little bit about Smash and speedrunning, kind of there's some overlap. And the first event that I ever attended, but I wasn't actually running anything in, was Smash the Record in 2017, which I bring it up because it was literally 10 minutes away from where I was living at the time. So it was...
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, I was like, I could almost walk there. I was like, oh, my, I got to check this out. There's speedrunners are going to be in town. So, but...
oh, that's cool. Yeah, I was definitely at that event doing speedruns.
I wish I would have known. Okay, so if you permit me just a moment to detour for a second. So my introduction to you was when you were offering up your input displays online, and if people wanted to order them, they could. You'd have them available at, I think it was SGDQ, and I have one in my hand that I'm showing on the stream right now. And Murdoch was mentioning that you have your input display going on stream. Do you mind taking just a quick second and telling us what is an input display, and why do you use yours?
Oh yeah, input displays are pretty cool. They the way that we make them, The software for them is open source. It's written, I believe, by Evil Ash 25, and they're fairly simple to construct from an Arduino and an extension cord. So I make them and I sell them for anyone who wants them. I usually just use electrical tape to tape them up, just kind of like as a low cost option for them that I do in my spare time once in a while. An input display is like
I've got mine up here on the stream too, by the way, just to let you know.
Oh, awesome. I'm glad it's holding up for you. Yeah, the input display is like you take an extension cord for any controller type that you like. Well, by any control, I mean within limitations. The software only supports so much. You cut it in half and you split open all the wires in it. And depending on the controller type it is, you connect the split wires into different pins on the Arduino. And then you plug the Arduino into your computer via USB. You plug your controller into the extension cord, and you plug your extension cord into the console. And you flash some firmware onto the Arduino, and it reads the pins that you spliced your wires into. And it will translate your inputs into a format that the program Nintendo Spy or Retro Spy can understand. And with Nintendo Spy and Retro Spy, they have XML documents that basically form your layouts for your input display, and people like Proximity Sound do custom layouts for people. They can commission them to have them display on their stream. It's a very cool system. And what it does is you press a button on your controller and you see on your computer it's lit up, and there's no input lag because of the way that we do it. We splice the wires into the Arduino pins, which the Arduino feeds out with a USB. There's no lag introduced because it's a passive listener. It's not actually processing your inputs in order to pass them through to your console. It's just listening to them. So yeah, people are kind of really getting into those, and they're quite cool because if you are doing something in a game that's very technical, you can actually see what the inputs that the runner is doing. I really like having them because I make a lot of tutorial videos, so you can see explicitly what I'm doing. Like I've made tutorial videos on things as simple as how to buffer an input in the hallway in SMRPG Sunken Ship, which is like I can explain how to do it. It's a simple trick, but sometimes people are visual learners, so I explain how to do it, and then you kind of look at my controller and you see the things lit up like as it's happening on screen. You're like, oh, okay, I understand what you're doing now. I usually have mine on screen just because I don't know, I just kind of like having it there. I don't really play a lot of games that require any super precise inputs, like in a chain sequence or anything. I don't play like super technical games with like frame rules and things like that. I just play Super Mario RPG, which has like precise input windows, but generally not like a billion of them in a row. Right. I just have the input display, just in case I ever decide to pick up a super technical game, or if I ever want to record a tutorial video, or if people want to laugh at me for doing rotation super jumps. It's just kind of there.
Well, they are awesome, and I appreciate you letting us know the little bit of the technicality behind it, or the technical side of it, because I've always curious why why there isn't any lag introduced. Like it boggles my mind that I can see the input instantly, and there you go. You hardwire right into the Arduino. So
yeah, it's very cool.
I've actually heard Mitch talk about it too, where he actually uses it to verify that he actually did an input correctly or not, which I thought was kind of a cool use of it as well. You can use it to play back and maybe perhaps study your runs and things like that.
Oh yes, absolutely. That's true. That is another great use for them.
And I'm glad that you do talk about them and you make them, and because first of all, it led me to your stream, and that's how I found all of the neat stuff you do on your stream. And then because it's like, oh man, she does this kick-ass hardware stuff. Has that side of the hardware and creating something like that? When did that have you always been interested in that kind of stuff, or I'm curious how you came about to actually just making these things?
I have like kind of a complicated history with hardware. I failed electrical circuits in my first year of university, full disclosure, but it's kind of something that I always wished I was better at, because I've seen like the cool projects people create, and like I really wish that I followed a schematic to build a parallel port adapter for an N64 controller, because parallel port adapters are like lightning fast. They are incredibly good. I speedrun DOS games with the Super Nintendo controller like that, but I couldn't get it to work because of the drivers. Like I've always thought that stuff was really cool, and I always wish I knew more about it so I could work more on very complicated hardware sides of things and kind of like understand how it works a lot better. So in 2017, I just decided, I guess, you know what, I'm going to make an input display because the code is open source. I just want to see if I can make it. And then, you know, if I do it well enough, maybe people will buy it from me. And then I had like 40 commissions in the next couple months. Like it was a nice, it was like it was a good way to get started. And also I was coming on some hard times financially at that time. So that was like a nice kind of thing to help me out on the side. Yeah, it's actually a lot of fun to make them. I had to learn how to solder to do that. And the way that I learned how to solder was kind of cool. I have a friend in the Smash community, the Smash 64 community. He goes by the protagonist or usually the hero on Twitter. And he does most of the hardware modding in that community because interesting, unique thing about the N64 Smash is that the N64 is, anyone who speedruns an N64 game knows, a very laggy console, which means that when we are playing doubles with each other, it's very easy to miss our inputs because of console lag. So what Protagonist and other people do is they will overclock the console so that it plays at the proper speed and that we can actually have like some really good doubles matches. So they call those OC consoles, or just overclock consoles. And you can actually find them at almost any major Smash 64 tournament. There are tons of them, so that we can have a proper doubles tournament where people are playing at their best. And I had a couple of overclock consoles that I commissioned from one of my buddies who lives in the USA, Night Fox. He did those for me. And Protagonist did some of my other ones as well. I used to have 5, but I sold most of them. I used to supply for tournaments. I run Smash 64 tournaments in the city.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So I had like a lot of equipment. So one of them wasn't working one day, and I was talking to Protagonist, and he called me on Discord and walked me through how to diagnose the problem with it. So we opened it up, and I showed him like on a webcam what was happening, and he was looking at it and suggesting things to me to try. And he's like, "Okay, try soldering that wire to that point." And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know how to do that." He's like, "Oh, don't worry, it's easy. I'll tell you how." Because like I had a soldering iron and I just never used it. So I pulled up my soldering iron. He was like kind of explaining to me how to do it, and I was like, "Oh, this is actually really cool. I like this." Wow. So that was kind of. So then I was like, "Hey, maybe I could do more things with that." So then I learned input displays.
Okay, that's such a funny. Not to go too much down the rabbit hole, but I had no idea that a Nintendo 64 could be overclocked. Is that a hardware modification? Is that something you're doing? Like, how are you doing that?
Yeah, it is a hardware modification. You open it up, and I don't remember the exact process on how to do it. I attempted to do it once and never got very far. But this was also, I attempted it in 2014. Like, this was a long time ago.
Got it.
But yeah, it is a hardware mod. You reconfigure some stuff in there. You attach some stuff. You'd have to ask those guys more about how to do it because it's not like something I'm like that familiar with.
Got it.
But yeah, it's a very popular thing in the Smash 64 community. Smash 64 like also has the unique thing where you cannot play stock with a time limit at the same time. So a lot of our tournaments actually use a ROM hack made by Jorgasms called 19XX, and that actually adds a timer to stock matches so that we can have like a legit a match go to time if it has to, and because that's like a legitimate strategy when you get to very high levels of play. If you're playing versus super campy player and you have a percent lead, you're going to time them out, so you have 8 minutes to do it. You can't do that on a typical cartridge, but we need that in place for tournament play. I could go on all day about the Smash 64 community, but that's just like some kind of interesting things that you don't like really see anywhere else in that series.
Well, and that's, I think, one of the fascinating, or one of the awesome things about these different communities that exist in gaming, because the Smash community had this need and they wanted to play the game a certain way, and it works better for tournaments this way. And I love that the community has come about by choosing modifying the ROM to have one that works for a tournament well, modifying hardware. I mean, that just blows my mind. I mean, that's so cool that the community was able to come together and actually be able to do. I'm sure there was disagreements and people wanted to what is fair, all these kind of things. But I think how cool is it that they ended up in a place like that?
Yeah, it's really cool. Like, in one thing that I love about Smash 64 is that they're incredibly resourceful. If there is a need for something, someone in that community will make it happen. And I find that speedrunning is very similar. Speedrunning is really similar, and I think that's kind of why like those communities were kind of the ones I stuck with.
So you touched on it just a tad, and if you don't mind, just briefly. So you mentioned going to university and things like that. When did you, or at least I assume you? I've seen some of your streams where you're doing programming and coding and things like that. When did you get that itch, or how did your development in that come about?
Oh, like doing development stuff?
Yeah, like because we're going to lead into the SMRPG randomizer discussion. I'm
Yeah.
curious how that came about.
Oh, I was 13 years old, still on Pokemon chat rooms, and but by that time I had downloaded MIRC. You know, I was one of the cool kids that wasn't using the Java chat applet anymore. Oh, I was like a big deal now. People had like automated scripts to show like what music they were listening to, or like auto responses to DMs and things like that, or they built chat bots like chat commands and things like that. Like, you know how everyone has Twitch bots nowadays. Well, that was like, we were doing that in IRC back in like the 90s and the early 2000s. So I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And I had a fairly popular channel on the server at the time. So I was like, I'm going to make something like that. So then I just started like searching for scripts, like MIRC scripts back in like MSN search or something like that. Just like looking for similar things and reading them and being like, okay, I think I kind of understand how this works, but not really. So I'm going to try changing a bunch of stuff in this code and see what it does. And also like the help files in MIRC explain like what all the variables and operators do and stuff. So I spent a lot of time reading that documentation. And eventually, you know, I put together some scripts from reverse engineering other ones, and I was able to kind of understand what was going on under the hood. And I was doing that like for a bunch of stuff over the next 2 years. I finally took a couple of introductory programming courses at my high school, and yeah, that was kind of how I got into it. But I didn't do it in university. I went to university for industrial engineering, which is like, I had 2 or 3 classes where I needed to know how to write stuff in Java, but it wasn't like a computer science program. It wasn't like a software engineering. Industrial engineering is like systems engineering. So I was all about like optimization math. That was my favorite course, was optimization, like operations research. But I couldn't find any internships in it, so I switched to user interface design. So everything that I was doing was like, you know, I was designing prototypes in rapid prototyping software, or in Photoshop, or in Adobe Illustrator. Like, I wasn't doing a whole lot of programming. It was just kind of like my hobby.
Yeah.
But my
God, I'm sorry.
my thesis project, they wanted to do a project with an evaluation of an app that could issue like it's a test that's done in hospitals for patients that are at a risk of having post-operative delirium, but they're always forgetting to do it in the hospitals. So they wanted an app that could facilitate it like easier, in a way that like anybody could use. It's literally just drag your finger from point A to point B kind of thing. They wanted to do something like that and assess the usability of it, but the problem was that the app didn't exist yet, so I had to program the app and then test it. So that was like not like a standard part of my curriculum, but it was my independent research project because I already knew how to write Java. I'd been doing it for years in high school, so I'm like, okay, this is fun. And that's actually how I got like my first couple jobs out of university, was they were looking for a designer. But back in 2014, like there was a big argument about, should a designer also know how to code? And I kind of had an advantage at the time because I was fresh out of university. Like, it's hard to get hired when you're fresh out of university. So I was going for design jobs, but I also knew how to program, and I had that project on my resume. So I got hired almost like immediately. But when you're a designer, you know, you're usually the first one to go when the company's having hard times. So I ended up just moving into the development sector because I had that in my background. I'm like, yeah, probably there's better job security as a developer, so I'm going to try and get more jobs than that. So that's kind of like where I've been the last couple of years, just like learning everything that I can.
So that's so cool that you have that. Though both, it's really nice actually that you have the design background as somebody who works in the marketing side of things in the real world and stuff like that. Not a lot of people speak design, but also speak the back end and how to make that work. So that's pretty cool that you actually have both of those going on for you. Um, Also, Stormcrow56K in the chat says that he has one of your input displays as well. You made his. He says, "Thank you."
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah,
So
that's awesome.
very cool. Okay,
Thank you
so
again for purchasing.
let's bring it on back a little bit here to some Super Mario RPG. Murdoch asked, first of all, how many copies of Mario RPG do you have? Super Mario RPG.
Not that many actually. I used to have a lot because Super Mario RPG was one of the last games to be supported by the SD2 SNES flash cart. That was because it uses the SA1 chip, which there was no emulation for until a year or two ago. So I bought some Japanese cartridges to make practice saves of different parts of the run, and I was learning 3 categories at the time, so I had like practice saves for each part of the run. But then once it was SD2 SNES added support for SA1, I just sold all my copies of the game.
No. I guess you don't need them as much anymore after that to kind of.
Yeah, well, I didn't sell all of them, just most of them, because I sold them so that other people learning the game could have like a proper cart to do runs on. So I was like, I don't really have a need to keep these around anymore. So just selling them for like $10, 15 if they wanted me to ship it to them.
That is so cool. See, that's the way you get that's the way you build the community. You make sure the cart's out there for them. So tell us, okay, I get a little bit really pretty dumb here. So if my questions aren't the right question or anything like that, please correct me. And my apologies if they are. But first of all, what is a randomizer, and why has the community chosen to randomize SMRPG?
Oh yeah, I can actually talk a bit about the history of that.
That'd be great.
Randomizers have actually been around for a while. Randomizers were initially developed by speedrunners for speedrunners, just as a new fun take on the game. What they mostly do is they will add some randomness to certain elements of the game. Whether that be you're playing like Link to the Past and the contents of all the treasure chests are shuffled amongst each other, so you have to go on a treasure hunt for the game. Or they could be things like there are some RPGs where what they randomize is pretty much just like your statuses, what spells you learn, what stuff the enemies can do, what's in your shops, that kind of stuff. But the game is still like linear. Then there are other randomizers like Final Fantasy IV Free Enterprise, which are open world. And by open world, what I mean is you start off with access to a lot of different parts of the game that you don't in the original game. So instead of starting off in Barren Town, you start off with your airship and you can go anywhere on the blue planet and do all the side quests and look for the thing that you're looking for, because all the prizes have been randomized, like all the side quest rewards have been randomized. That's just kind of like the basic concept of randomizers. It's just like it's a fresh take on your original game that just turns it into a new puzzle in an already familiar world. And I think that's why like they've become so popular, is because like, you play the same game over and over and over again, you love it, but sometimes you want something a little bit different, but without straying too far out of your comfort zone. So you play a randomizer, and that takes familiar elements and just makes them a little bit different. It makes you have to like think about what you're doing and solve puzzles with what you've been given. We have that in Super Mario RPG. The first randomizer of Super Mario RPG was written by Abyssinium. Abyssinium has done a lot of RPG randomizers. And what the randomizer was back then was a Windows batch file that it was a script that accepted a copy of SMRPG, and it just scrambled a bunch of stuff. What it did at the time was it randomized the contents of shops. It gave you random numbers for your party's stats and your stat growth. It randomized the enemy stats, what they're strong or weak to. It randomized who can wear which equipment. It randomized like the costs of items, stuff like that. Like it was still SMRPG. It was still like the same game. Like it was linear, except it was just like shuffling some of the numbers in the game and the placements of things in your shops. That was like the first iteration of the randomizer, and then Dorkmaster Fleck and Alanim came along a few years later, and Dorkmaster Fleck translated it into a web version, so you didn't have to download the Windows batch file anymore, but he took all the exact same logic and made it like a Python web application that just like just like applies it to a game and spits a ROM back out at you, so you don't have to like actually do any downloading anymore. And Alanim did some really cool stuff. He developed the first cutscene patch for the game, so we are literally playing the same version of SMRPG with all the cutscenes and everything, just with a couple things shuffled. Alanim actually came along and he made a patch for the game that was integrated into the randomizer that shortened or removed all the cutscenes so you can get through them very fast, because you played the game so many times you don't want to have to like through everything, yeah, especially when it's in a randomizer and you can kind of get some really unexpected results, like enemies that you have to fight after a series of cutscenes that just like destroy you, and you have to go through the cutscene every time you want to attempt it again. Yeah. So that was getting like kind of tiring for a lot of people. They didn't want to play the randomizer too much, like because of that. So he removed that cutscene, and then that kind of like that also made it like people want to play it a lot more often. Right. But one of the kind of downsides of SMRPG Randomizer at the time was that the contents of chess were not randomized. In fact, that was not done until earlier this year, and I actually helped with the code for that. The reason that it wasn't done is because chess and SMRPG are programmed in such a way that is not consistent among all of them. So it's not as simple as just like finding an address and changing what's at the address. Because chess are programmed as events, we didn't really it wasn't like really as easy to do that. We had to really dive deep into the game's code and see how that could be done. So Alanim actually did most of the work, like making that possible. Fleck created all the necessary data structures around Alanim's research so that we knew exactly where to write the code that contains the item IDs. And I wrote the logic for it. So that was actually only released in March.
So you definitely have answered like a bunch of my questions already. I'm curious, when you're looking at the code, or when you're injecting things into it or changing it, how do you get access to it in a ROM or in a game like that? Do you reverse engineer? How does something like that happen?
So I actually don't know the proper answer to that, because in SMRPG we're very lucky. Some ROM hackers a couple years ago, namely John Gergolo, he actually produced a ROM hacking tool for SMRPG that is incredibly, incredibly comprehensive and powerful. We don't use it for directly modifying the game because sometimes it has some unintended side effects. But what we actually do is that this ROM hack tool called Lazy Shell, it decomposes a lot of things in the game and translates them into human readable code, and it actually shows you the corresponding hex code for all of it. So we don't actually have to do a whole lot of work in reverse engineering it. There are some times occasionally where we will have to reverse engineer like some of the code that we're reading, just like based on patterns we've seen elsewhere in the code. I can think of a time recently when some bosses were hard locking because we changed one byte in the code, and it turns out we actually just like put a byte patch like one address too late. No. And the thing that we overwrote was a pointer that is the start of, I think, your own party's attack listing. So things were going horribly, horribly wrong. And when I saw like what was happening, I was like, oh my gosh, I know exactly what the game is trying to do, and I know why this is an incorrect byte. But this is actually crazy. I see exactly what it's trying to do with this improperly placed byte, and that's actually really cool. So I moved it back one space, and then boom, everything worked.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, it's we have that tool already, so it is like fairly easy to read. In fact, I've assembled a team of like 18 people that are actually combing through all of the game's event code and telling me where all the item grant locations are, because I do plan on rewriting how chess item granting works. And it's like so easy to understand that I was able to just make a couple of YouTube videos and show it to like a whole bunch of people, and they read it and they went to town, and we have like this big document of like where like all the addresses that the item grants are at. Like that's how lucky we are as SMRPG developers. But we're also unlucky in the fact that like nobody in our team like really knows assembly, so it's kind of hard to add new features that are not like done within the scope of what Lazy Shell can accomplish. So if someone wants to add a frame counter, I don't know how to add a frame counter. Don't ask me that. I don't know assembly. Like I haven't written assembly in 13 years. I could pick it up again, but it had to be like a huge learning curve, you know. Yeah.
So and I think you brought up something that I actually just recently discovered, and I feel silly as a speedrunner. I feel like I should have discovered this a long time ago, but I saw Author Blues doing some memory address. He was looking at memory addresses to kind of analyze, hey, how much damage does a certain enemy take, or a certain boss, all those kind of things. And even I am not a coder. I don't like it. Just it baffles my brain what you're able to do with programming and coding and all that kind of stuff. And I will say but if you learning how to look at memory addresses provides some really valuable information, and I love that you're mentioning it in the randomizer, because that's kind of a next evolutionary step. You can actually you can manipulate those those memory addresses to, like you're saying, randomize certain events. But then to take the next step, you're going to have to, like you were mentioning before, you have to do some other things as well, not just changing some memory addresses.
Yeah, it depends. Depends a lot on the feature you want to add. There's looking at memory addresses as in you are looking at the final production build of the game. You're like loading the game up into a hex editor and seeing what's going on there, and you are using a ROM editor and changing some things, so you compare them side by side in your hex editor and see what changed. There's also looking at memory addresses and looking in your game's active memory, so seeing that's things like RNG counters, or I think RNG counters is probably the best example. Like, you're not going to find an RNG value like in the game's hex code. You're going to see it like in your game's active memory, like when you're playing it in an emulator, and you have an emulator that is monitoring certain parts in the game's active memory. It's like your hard drive versus your RAM. That's kind of how that works. It's so like that's actually pretty cool stuff. Like, looking at hex stuff in your game's active memory is actually how RNG manips are found. It's how like a lot of strats in the game are found. It's how the wrong warp in SMRPG any% was discovered. It's there's just like so much you can do with ROMs and ROM hacks and things. It's amazing. And being able to like monitor what is happening in your game as you're playing through it, I think, is actually how they develop ROM hacking tools like that. They understand like what the logic is under the hood, and they can actually map out what is taking place where at each place in the code just by like playing through the game and monitoring a certain address and seeing it change when you enter a room. You're like, okay, so this controls what room I'm in, maybe. And you do more research, and you kind of come up with something really cool.
No, it's it can be really empowering if you're, especially for like a game that doesn't have a big community around it. I run a lot of TurboGrafx 16 games, and we don't have very many runners in a lot of the games. So this information is like super valuable, because one thing, we don't have 8,000 people, we don't have 100 people playing the game to discover these things. And so it's really great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned that you worked on the logic for the SMRPG randomizer, and first of all, how do you go about establishing what the logic should be before you actually implement it into the randomizer itself?
Oh yeah, that's I love this question actually. A lot of it just comes from like my background. Like, before I went into design, I was really into optimization math. So coming up with like equations for things, like just like inventing equations for stuff, I just love doing that. It's just fun. So I was thinking a lot about I was playing a lot of FF4 Free Enterprise at the time, and I really liked what they did with their chess shuffle options. They have a bunch of different methods in which to randomize the chests. So I was trying to do something similar. So in FF4 Free Enterprise at the time, what they had was you could either do randomization where literally anything can appear anywhere, or you could have randomization where literally anything can appear anywhere except for the very best item in the game. Like, you're not going to find adamant armor, you're not going to find Stardust Rod. They have another option where you randomize what's in the chest, but generally chests that are harder to access will have better items. That was what I thought was really interesting.
That's cool.
So the logic for SMRPG randomization is actually all done in Python. We do like a lot of Python code, and what the Python code is, it determines the ultimate order of where everything is supposed to go, and then it translates that into a ROM patch that you can apply to the game, and it applies it to the game and spits out a ROM at you. So the Python code is actually like, Python is known for being a very human readable programming language. In fact, I didn't know any Python at all until I started working on SMRPG Randomizer, just because I heard it was an easy language to pick up. So I just read it. And I was like, okay, I think I kind of understand what's going on here. So the first thing I did actually was rewrite the shop code, because the shop randomization code was written for the original randomizer that Abyssin had made, and that was written for the game being linear. But now this randomizer had been made open world because of Alan had made a new patch that allowed us to randomize who had star pieces and give us access to the whole world map right at the start of the game, which transformed the randomizer like in a ridiculously amazing way. It was like I played the first ever like beta ROM for it. And I was like, this is incredible, dude. This is so cool. So yeah, we do it all in Python. And I actually looked at a list of all the chests that Elenim had compiled data for. He had done some ROM hacking that allowed it to be easier to patch items into those chests, and he made a big list of them that Fleck used to make the data structures for them. And I went through and I made an Excel document of ranking each of the chests in terms of how easy they are to access. And that was kind of how I made like the balance chest option was generally a harder to access chest will contain a better item. Now, a better item was probably even harder to write than like determining what's a better item was harder to write than determining what's a harder chest to access, because a harder chest to access is, okay, I know this is behind 2 progression items, so this one will be ranked higher because you need more stuff to get there. Or you need to do a boss fight to get here, or you need to traverse through a really long dungeon to get here, that kind of stuff. In SMRPG Randomizer, the properties of your equipment can be randomized, so they can like the shirt that gives you like 3 defense or whatever it is could suddenly have KO protection. Like that's a big deal. Like KO protection is a huge deal. There are a lot of unblockable like one-hit KO moves in the game that just don't work on you if you have that item equipped. So what I ended up doing was I made like a spreadsheet of every equip in the game, and I wrote out all of its stats in the columns, and additionally I put like a column for each property it can have. So that's things like full fire resistance, half fire resistance, full ice resistance, half ice resistance, resistance to poison, resistance to mushroom, resistance to berserk, one hit KO status, 1.5 times attack boost multiplier, speed increase, like all that kind of stuff. And I had to, like, with a lot of trial and error, I came up with a formula on, like, just calculating a score for each item and then outputting a rank for each one. And I just fine-tuned that until, like, I saw a ranking system that, like, I kind of agree with from my knowledge of the original game. Right. And then Fleck generated a bunch of test seeds for me that spat out all the equip data to a spreadsheet. And then I ran that formula on all those spreadsheets to see, like, if I kind of agreed with the assessment that my formula made. And if I didn't, well, back to the drawing board. And eventually I came up with a formula that I thought was like very fair for calculating how good an item is relative to all the other items in the game. And so that would be able to divide all the items in the game into one of 4 ranks. So you have like your 10 or 15 best items in the game. Those go in the hardest to access chests. Then you have your next 20 items. Those go in like sort of hard to access, but not as hard as like the top 15, and so on and so forth. And that was like the logic that I had to write for chest and shop randomization. Actually, shop randomization is similar. It's like harder to access shops get better stuff, or you can just randomize everything anywhere, up to you. But the rank of the item and its score actually determines the price of the item. So that was another formula that I had to adjust. That was the first thing I did as part of the development team for the randomizer, was come up with that stuff and just implement the logic for it. And it's like constantly undergoing revisions. I'm always thinking about like ways to make it better that I just haven't implemented yet, but I have like a huge notepad file on my phone of things I want to change about
No, I think thank you for sharing that, because that's super fascinating how that actually goes about and gets created. What's the how do you determine if the randomizer actually works, like you can still beat the game? Is that just through simple testing, or is there a formula? Like, how does that part of it work?
Oh, there actually is a formula. I don't work on that, so I can't speak like too much to it, but I think Fleck actually implemented that, and he basically copied what Link to the Past randomizer does, which is like you set It's like a logic chain. Every location in the game, like every item, has a set of requirements it needs to be met in order for it to be accessible. And if there are any violations in the requirements, like castle like castle key 1 is behind the door that opens when you have castle key 1, then it just won't generate the seed. It'll generate a new one.
Got it.
It just makes it impossible. I've learned a bit more about that from what I've been doing lately. I've been helping with a web tracker for Ocarina of Time Randomizer. I've been like adding Ocarina of Time Randomizer has like 100 and something toggleable logical
It's
like
intense.
sequence breaks.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you can turn sequence breaks on and off in the logic. And there is a web tracker that I really like, which is track-oot.net. And there is a section where you can enable or disable those logic skips. But there was only like 30 of them done or so, and the developers were just really busy. They hadn't had time to implement the rest of them, and I was playing that randomizer a lot, and I learned a bunch of sequence breaks because I do a lot of multi-world. So when I'm in multi-world, I'm typically playing with friends to help them get like used to the randomizer and like just play for fun. So I typically end up stuck a lot of the time where I have nothing to do. So I learned a bunch of sequence breaks just because I was bored and I wanted something else to do in the randomizer. So I was like, oh, it would actually be really cool if I could enable or disable all of the sequence breaks that I actually know in this tracker. So I asked the developers of the tracker about it, and they're like, oh yeah, this is open source. Here's the file where it's done. And I went through and I added the rest of the logic skips, and that's in the development branch right now. But what I did actually was I went to ootrandomizer.com, I looked at their source code, and I read the logic files for the actual OOT randomizer, and I just tried to replicate that with what the tracker was doing. And I was like, oh, this is actually really similar to how SMRPG Randomizer's logic works. So I think that's like a fairly standard thing to do in Randomizer is you have like a set of requirements that have to be met for each item or each location, and it just like ensures that those are met so that it's not an impossible seed to complete. It's like it's all like actually embedded into the code that this is required in order for something for this item to be placed here. It has to meet these conditions, and if it doesn't, well, it's not going to go here. Yeah, that's actually something that Fleck did.
I'm glad that you pointed out those correlations, because my rando experience is with OOT. That's the one I enjoy. I'm a casual player. I don't speedrun, and so I don't know glitches and, to your point, sequence breaks and things like that. So it's interesting that I know on OOT you can, depending on your toggle, I can make it as basic as possible. Somebody like me can finish the game, but somebody who's been running the game for 5 years, 10 years may want obviously a much more sophisticated or complicated experience. So that's cool that there are these options exist for the randos.
Yeah, I actually love that about things like OOT Randomizer or FF4 Free Enterprise and all the other like really well developed randomizers out there. That is like kind of where I personally would like to take SMRPG Randomizer. I'm actually like in the works. It's a little bit on the back burner right now because I'm starting a new job next week. I've been playing OOT Multi-World here and there. I've been working on some other projects, but that's kind of like the direction that I would like to take SMRPG Randomizer, is to have it be much more customizable. So I've actually like written an interface for it and shown it to some people who play the randomizer like religiously, and they are so excited. It's but I'm only one person on the team. There are actually 9 developers credited with the SMRPG Randomizer, and they're all excellent, amazing people, and we all work on different things. So it's like it's a really, really cool team.
I think that's so awesome. And it also seems like with the, as your point, like with Final Fantasy IV, the Free Enterprise and all that, like these are the kind of the next evolutionary steps of the randomizing community and things like that. Because at some point you want to play what's next. That's one of the things that I love about a randomizer, is that it makes the game just feel brand new. And so after you've spent some time now in the current iteration, you want to, you're ready for the next thing, which is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty cool. Like, just like when we think we've thought of everything there is to randomize, there something else comes up. Like one of my favorite additions lately has actually been one guy who joined our team just after RPG Limit Break. His name is Pat. He's one of the developers. He actually wrote a feature that like disassembles the boss scripts and reconstructs them based on like some logic that happens in the Python code. So what he built was a spell randomizer, and the spell randomizer is hilarious. It's amazing. There are some unused spells in the game that are like ridiculously overpowered, and you just have to hope and pray that you don't get them. And the one that was he wrote it. He put a comment in the code that says we're excluding Big Bang from this because Big Bang is dumb, or something like that. And like, nice. I was like looking at how he built this disassembler and the spell randomization code. I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. And and like it actually made my life a lot easier because I was working on a feature lately. I was doing like a couple of features at the same time in tandem with each other. I was making a no free characters flag happen. So SMRPG Rando, the way it's been for a long time was you start off with a party of 3 characters. And the reason you cannot start off with only one person is because there are 9 fights in the game that either soft lock or hard lock if you don't have a full party. And yeah, so we thought that, you know, it might not be possible to make it able to start off with only one character, but I was like, hold on a second, there's something funky going on in this boss code. And I started looking at it a bit more, and I came up with some ways to make it not soft lock anymore. And that mostly came from editing animation scripts. Like there are cutscenes that happen in boss battles, and those were actually the source of the hard lock. So I looked at the battle cutscenes, and what they were trying to do was they were trying to animate characters that don't exist. Oh. So it's trying to animate party member 2 and party member 3 who are not in your party. So all I did was take those animations out, and then it worked fine. But then you had more complicated things. There were 2 fights that were a little more complicated. Actually 3. One of them was not a soft lock, but it just made no sense if you didn't have a full party. The 3 fights in question were Valentina, Bunt, and Bowyer. Valentina was kind of like a mix of 2 problems. Valentina was like, Valentina will crash your game because Dodo is trying to take a character away who isn't there. I didn't want to take that whole section of the fight away, so I just added some logic to the fight that says if you start off the fight and you only have less than 3 people in your party, just don't summon Dodo. But if you have 3 people, all right, have fun fighting Dodo in the 1v1. That is still happening. So I just had to add like a condition there. But the way that conditional logic in boss battles works is very rudimentary. So the way I had to structure it was actually quite a challenge, and it was really, really fun to work on. I had to do like a lot of chains of conditions that ended up working in the end. The butt fight was like its own beast because that is the cake fight in SMRPG. And for those of you who've played the game or at least watched me speedrun it, y'all know what goes down in the second phase. Yeah. What goes down in the second phase is it doesn't matter how much damage you do. It just straight up doesn't matter because that's an event fight. The cake has 5 candles on its head. You attack it once, it blows out a candle. And it regenerates one at the end of every turn. So think about what happens when you only have 1 person in your party and you need to blow all the candles out and attack it in order to be able to advance to phase 3. Well, what's going to happen if you can only issue 1 attack per turn and it regenerates 1 per turn? That's a soft lock until you die. So what I ended up doing was added some checks at the start to set a bit, and the bit will actually determine if Bunt is going to regenerate a candle or not at the end of the turn. The bit is only set if you have 1 character. If you have 1 character in your party, it sets a bit that says don't regenerate candles. So I did that. Don't regenerate a candle if you only have 1 person, but if you have 2 or more, it's fair game. So in fact, having 2 people for Bunt is probably the crappiest way to fight him. And so I pushed that. But then Elenim had a very evil idea that I liked a lot. And it was, okay, instead of having him just not attack you when you have 1 character, have him not attack you, but only if you attacked him that turn. I'm like, I like this because he regenerates if you take a turn to heal yourself. So that's evil. I love it. I'm implementing it. So the third fight was not a soft lock. This was the Bowyer fight. Bowyer has 3 buttons, and he can disable one that disables that button for you entirely. It just gets rid of you. He locks Y, you can't use spells. He locks A, you can't use standard attacks. He locks X, you can't use items. That's actually not random. That's based on a counter system, and the counter system attributes points to each attack that you do, and after 2 turns, it counts up how many points you have, and it passes a certain threshold that determines what button it locks. Well, some of the thresholds are not possible to meet without 3 people in your party. So I just redid the math on that and made a really complicated script for him that has different thresholds based on your party size. So that was like the third fight that was kind of affected by that. And rewriting all those scripts became like probably 1,000,000,001 times easier because of Pat's boss disassembler. And I'm just like, this is awesome. I love this. I'm gonna change Boyer and it's not gonna be a problem. And yeah, he's done like some really amazing stuff for the rando. The thing, like the big thing when I joined the randomizer development team is that there were 4 devs at the time. There were Fleck, Ellen, Swinch, and Yaki Bomb. And Yaki Bomb is a really, really experienced SMRPG ROM hacker. So he was able to find things in Lazy Shell that none of the rest of us really understood. Because for a while, Gino could not actually use randomized items. Otherwise, the game would just crash. Yaki Bomb is the person who fixed that because he knew about what was happening. He understood what was happening in Gino's attack animations and fixed it. Swinch went like he did some really crazy stuff. The dude was editing the credit sequence, which is not like available in Lazy Shell. He was just like cold calling random like addresses in the credit sequence. Like he just found them. He just went and he found I don't know what he did, but he found like all the stuff in the credit sequence and he edited the credits. And you can't do that in the ROM editor. So he documented all of his findings, and then Pat actually went and disassembled the credit sequence so that we can add stuff to it like easily. So we actually have like a proper credit sequence now with all the developers, the people who came up with the concept of the randomizer, which are Abyssinum and Lack Attack 24 is the guy that came up with the concept of the open world randomizer, all the graphics artists that did the palette swaps, all the QA people that are the team I assembled, and my other team of the logic mappers. That's all in there now because he made that possible. So when I came onto the team, like Fleck wrote the Python code that placed stuff in the addresses that Alan gave him, but there were some things that were a little more complicated that couldn't be accomplished at the time. Like, what I wanted to do was make it so that Bowser's Keep can be shortened or lengthened depending on how many of the obstacle course doors you want to do. And then also have a wacky flag in there that out of the 6 doors, they're not like set obstacle courses. So you go in door number 1 and you have like 3 platforming rooms. Well, instead of having 3 platforming rooms, you might have a platforming room, a puzzle room, and another puzzle room, or you might have a battle room, a puzzle room, and a platforming room, like all behind the same door. That wasn't possible to do because the room loaders for each of them are quite different and actually required some custom logic to be generated on the fly in the ROM, like in the SMRPG ROM. And nobody on the team knew how to do that. And I had just joined the team and I just like was working with it for a while, and I actually came up with a way to generate like a custom code sequence that SMRPG can understand and just like dump it into the ROM directly. So that was like groundbreaking. That opened the door for like a lot of new things for us to do. That's actually like I applied a similar concept to randomizing, like doing the proper animations in the boss randomization. So you walk into Bandit's Way and instead of seeing Crocker running around, you see Booster because you're fighting Booster in that area. We didn't have that before. You would just have to see who it was when you entered the fight. That was like something that we thought was impossible because we didn't really know how to write conditional game. Like we didn't know how to write game logic conditionally. We knew how to replace like item IDs and stuff like that, but we didn't know how to like write our own game logic on the fly. So that was like a big thing. And then Pat comes along and he knows how to do that, except he knows how to do it better than I do. So now we have like a couple of devs on the team who like really know the stuff, and we were able to like make all these really cool enhancements to the randomizer that were previously thought to be impossible. Like we're always discovering new things we can do with the game, and it's just like it's going places, and it's been like a really fun project to be on for the last 9 months or so.
That's so awesome. And I think it ties back into what we were originally talking about, which is like all these iterations create just these new experiences and now unexpected experiences as you're playing through the game. So it's never going to feel, I mean, that's the whole point of the randomizer. It's never the same experience twice, but this really goes, I mean, it really changes the way that you're going to experience the game when you're playing through it with it, depending on your seed. I think it's so cool. I think it's so great that you guys are still too. You're growing and you're updating. I mean, there's these changes are happening. It seems like all the time, and it's really great that you have such a diverse team that gives you the options to try to go in and play in some of these areas you haven't done in the ROM before, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool because like everyone on the dev team brings like a different set of talents. Like we have 3 other devs too that I haven't mentioned yet. Like SNES Chalmers actually helped me build the palette swap code that I put together the graphics team to flesh out. They actually like built all the palette swaps because like we were able to figure out how to do it, and that also involved like changing the names of the characters, which was something that he found for me. There's also A.T. Bigelow who works on he works on the web front end. He's actually building a spoiler log. So he doesn't deal so much like with the game's internal workings. He deals with like the web interface, which is great because we need people to do that. And then we also have amazing Ampharos, actually. Yeah, the Ocarina of Time randomizer developer has contributed to SMRPG Randomizer as well. So that is obviously bringing in like some very good experience. His contribution was actually he rewrote the logic of how item stats are shuffled, which is great because one of the complaints about the randomizer was that like it's too predictable which items end up being OP and which ones don't. And his code kind of changed that. And that I thought that was like super cool.
That's really cool. Thanks for recognizing the entire team too. I know because a lot from the outsider, just as the the viewer or the person who's just playing through it, there seems like there's so many unsung heroes who are doing this. Nobody's getting paid or anything. This is just the community, contributing to all these things. So.
Oh yeah. If there's one thing I love doing, it's shouting out like everyone on that team because everyone who works on SMRPG Randomizer brings like some really unique talent to it, like something that they can do better than anyone else on the team can. Like there's just so much talent on that team, and it's like really showing in like what we're producing.
So a question for you: if I wanted to play the SMRPG Randomizer, how do I go about doing that? And can I play it on my N64? Like, does it work on original hardware?
It does, yeah. It works on SD2 SNES. You can play it at randomizer.smrpgspeedruns.com. You just you have to have a copy of the English version of the game. You can actually play it on an SD2 SNES or on a Wii. If your Wii is homebrewed, you can play it on that. That's actually how we used to have to play it because SD2 SNES didn't support it. So we were able to like inject it into a Wii Virtual Console copy of the game and just like upload that onto the console. So that option is still there for people who prefer to play with VC. But yeah, you can do it either in an emulator, or you can play it on your SD2 SNES, or you can play it on Wii Virtual Console if you have a soft-mounted Wii.
I got a question for you. I've never actually beat SMRPG. Would you recommend that I try to do something like that before I take on the randomizer? Or like, I'm curious or is it something you can just jump right into? Curious about that.
I would suggest beating SMRPG first, just so that like you kind of understand like what's going on in the game, because the randomizer doesn't give you a ton of direction if you've never played before because it's open world. We do actually have like a beginner's guide to SMRPG Randomizer on the site that walks you through like what everything does, how battle mechanics work. It's very, very detailed. That was actually the first contribution I made to the randomizer, was that player's guide. If you are like new to the game and you've never beaten SMRPG before and you kind of like read that as you're playing through the randomizer, I think you could probably beat the game. It's just like if you have a lot of experience with the game, obviously it's going to be a lot easier. If you know like, okay, final boss in the factory, that much, okay, then you're probably good to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the concept of the randomizer is that to get to the final boss of the game, you need to collect all your star pieces, and we don't know which of the bosses have star pieces, so you have to go around fighting all the bosses to find all the star pieces and open up the way to the factory, and that's how you beat the game. That's like the most basic concept of the randomizer. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, absolutely go for it. It's really fun. There's a whole lot of other things you can customize to kind of make it your own experience.
I would also recommend that, once again, I haven't beat the game, but I really enjoy watching people play this on stream. Like it's fun and entertaining to watch. You can pick it up and understand it pretty easily as a viewer. Especially with people who play it quite often, they talk through it and it's very interesting. You can talk over it pretty well as well to kind of explain what's going on.
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's with the beginning of a new year, it's 2020. What are any plans for you for speedrun? I know you've recently made some marathon appearances. Is there anything you'd like to games you haven't gotten to, or things you want to play in the new year?
You know what? I say every year I'm going to learn such and such and such game, and then I discover a new project and forget all about it. So I no longer make New Year's resolutions because I'm pretty much always working on something all the time. Um, I
Smart
do
move.
want to I do want to like the thing I want to do more often is stream, whether I'm just streaming speed runs or I'm streaming like commission streams or I'm streaming like development streams. I just want to stream more often. I just want to show people what I'm up to, which most of the time is SMRPG randomizer code or working on perlers or playing Ocarina of Time randomizer because I'm just like hooked on that now. Um, yeah, I would like to. One thing that I do want to do is I want to PB an SMRPG any percent because it's been almost 3 years since I've PB'd that category, and you know that's like the category of SMRPG. I want to finish the routing of SMRPG most of the stuff because Oxus has been rerouting it. I want to like consolidate our routes together and like kind of make something super optimized. So what I'm actually doing is I'm building a new routing tool for SMRPG. I've built a couple so far, but I'm building like a more integrated one that covers like your coins and your inventory as opposed to just your experience. Those are kind of like my two main goals for this year is to complete those two things. I'm probably not going to be making any marathon appearances this year because I'm starting a new job like next week, and like I don't want to be asking like for a week off to go somewhere like when
Yes.
I'm only a couple months into the job, you know. And also like if I'm going to be taking time off, priority goes to having my best friend visit me because my best friend who I met from speedrunning SMRPG taught me almost everything I know about the game, and he's been my best friend for like 4 years, but we don't live in the same country.
Oh.
So yeah, so if I'm gonna take time off, like priority goes to if he's available to come and see me, and if not, then all right, I'll go to a marathon.
Very right. Exactly. That's you know, when I was doing the research for our chat today, I was actually a little bit surprised to see that you hadn't that your last PB for any percent was 2 years ago because it seems like I watch you run the game all the time on stream and things, but a lot of times it's randomizers, it's developments, all those other things you're talking about doing. And so when you get back into a grind like that, I assume that's going to be kind of one of the things that's going to take some time to put into that to make that work.
Yeah. One thing I don't like to do is I don't like to burn myself out on something.
Oh, nice.
If I am going to accomplish a PB in any percent, I don't actually place like that much stock in it. I find that like one of the worst things you can do is set yourself a deadline that you have to PB by. I think that's like a terrible idea in most cases. So it's like if I don't PB by the end of the year, no big deal. It just means I was busy doing other things that I was enjoying doing. But if it's like, you know, if I'm just kind of sitting around, I feel like SMRPG, I'll boot it up, I'll do a run, I'll see how I do. I don't run with splits anymore because I get too anxious looking at them. I have a lot more fun playing the game if I'm not using splits and like barely even looking at my timer. I'm more just like kind of producing it because I love playing the game, and sometimes people like watching me play the game even if I'm not the best in the world at it. That's just kind of my philosophy with that game. Like it's a grind, but it's also not a grind that I like voluntarily participate in, I suppose.
No, that's actually really good advice, and I haven't heard it articulated that way. And you know, and I have the first time I ran at SGDQ in 2018, I did that. I set that goal. I'm like, you know, I got a PB before I go do this in a marathon setting and all those kind of things. And of course, it was detrimental. Nothing, you know, my gameplay seemed to get worse and all those kind of things. But for the last few marathons I've done, I'm just going to do no reset runs just so I'm prepared for the marathon. And the PB came naturally both times, you know, from two different games. So that's really good advice, I think, for people. That's great.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Okay, very cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time and chatting through all this. And I thank you also for telling us the details and geeking out a little bit on the behind the scenes on how a randomizer comes together, like SMRPG Randomizer. If people want to, your stream is awesome. If you haven't seen Pidge's stream, there's a bunch of cool stuff. There's a Game Boy webcam, and it's just to entice you to go check it out. Where can people find you?
I set up channel points so that people can change the color palette of my webcam now.
Oh, that is so okay. I can't wait. It's gonna be so geeky. Where can people find you if they want to go watch this?
They can find me at twitch.tv/pidge01. That's pretty much where I am most of the time. I have a Discord server too. I hang out in there. The SMRPG Discord server. My name in there is Boxboy in all caps because I think that's just like the funniest enemy name in the game. But a lot of people join the Discord and don't realize that's me. But so yeah, if you join SMRPG Discord looking for the randomizer, that's me.
And if I may recommend, if you're at all interested in SMRPG, the video that's been playing during the interview, if you're watching this on YouTube, is Pidge's run from RPG Limit Break 2019. I was about to say this year, but it's not this year anymore. That's officially last year. But besides the gameplay is at a really high level, there's a lot of great explanation about what's happening on. It's a really great introduction to the game if you're not familiar with it as well. So, Pidge, thanks so much. Good luck in your new job and everything that's going on this year. And I can't wait to see you return to stream and see when you come up next.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been really fun.
Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. If you're enjoying the podcast, please feel free to share it with family, friends, and leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. All those go a really long way to helping out the podcast. Thank you so much. Have a good one.